Well, I'm really excited today because Sarah and Tom from the Grateful Gardeners is on the Flower Podcast. Welcome, guys.
Welcome.
Hey, good to see you,
Here we
Scott.
are.
Good to hear you.
Yeah. Well, I was so excited when we did that Clubhouse and we were able to release that back a couple months ago. And here we are doing the official interview. You guys, I just enjoy your feed so much. I feel like you guys are continually putting out these morsels of important things, whether you're a designer in your area or whether or not you are encouraging flower farmers to raise the bar on in some area, or it's just your, or like last week or a couple weeks ago, it was like your battle wounds from, you know.
Yeah.
So I
Bad
appreciate,
week.
yeah, exactly. The good weeks and the bad. So I appreciate you guys joining me, and I'm really excited for the opportunity to help inspire and educate some more people. So
Us too.
We're excited to be here.
Thank you.
so okay, we got to start at the beginning. We always start at that beginning. So how did you guys get into the world of growing flowers?
Oh my. This is a whole long story, which, I guess we'll try to do the Reader's Digest version.
Make an attempt.
Yeah. Tom and I feel like we tell our quote unquote story so many times that people are like, yeah, we heard it, we got it, but here we go. For those of you who don't know, Tom and I have had totally different careers until around approximately 2018, which is when we started our flower farming journey. Prior to that, we had both worked in professional careers doing nothing to do with flowers. We don't come from agricultural backgrounds per se. Tom's got some farming in his distant family in Idaho. I have none of that in my family background. I was really never exposed to anything more than just landscape projects around a house in the suburbs
Sure.
prior to this. So I practiced law for 21 years and
Wow.
and continue to practice law. So that has been an intense, mostly focused on litigation. So that's been a very intense, very difficult line of work. And
Stressful.
Yeah, very stressful. And you want to tell them what you?
Yeah. So and then I was a research scientist. I had got my undergrad in biochem and I did a PhD in neuroscience and pharmacology, and I was going to be doing Alzheimer's and Parkinson's research. And I basically, it was going to be academia, and then just realized how long it would take me to get money and get grant money and get funding. And I had little babies and daycare ain't cheap. And so I ended up going into sales, which is, fairly lucrative. And so I went to scientific and medical sales, and, that made a lot of good money, but man, it really was really boring and not intellectually stimulating in any way, shape, or form. So really hated it. And that brought us up to present day pretty much.
So that's sort of like the background piece. We both sort of arrived at this, but I think in part it was also driven by the fact that Tom and I, this is a second marriage for both of us. We got married in 2016. We just had our 5th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we had been together about 4 years prior to that. So we combined our 2 families. We have 3 children combined. I have 1 from a previous marriage and Tom has 2. And, it was a difficult thing to go through divorces and, reclaim our lives in a different way, combine our families and figure out how to do a different way of being. And honestly, I think we arrived at the whole flower farming thing as more of a discussion of like, wow, wouldn't it be cool to do something that doesn't have anything to do with our jobs? It doesn't have anything to do with the kids and going to basketball games or Palms practice. It just is something that we could do together in this new relationship that is just for us. And we both are interested in it. We both think it would be cool. It would be outside, and we're big outdoorsy people. It would be learning something new. And I like to refer to Tom as a seeker. You know, we both are just constantly looking for knowledge of different things. So I thought that would be challenging. And we had gone to Colorado in February of 2018 to visit Tom's mother, who was engaged at that time in deep into the modules of the Floret online flower farming class. And she encouraged us to sit down with her and watch a module on seed starting. And we did. And we were like, you know, oh, this is really fun. Like, we didn't really think it would be anything. We were just sort of indulging her, except that we then watched it and we were like, wow, that would be something fun we could try.
Erin Benzakein does a really good job of making it accessible and laying it out in a way that you feel like, oh,
everybody can grow flowers.
Can try this.
You know, how hard could this possibly be? So yeah,
famous last word.
Yeah, exactly. Just completely, you know, naive and unknowing. So, but you know, we did that, and we didn't. You know, the other challenge for us at the time was that we lived in a neighborhood that had houses that were, you know, really close together. It was one of those sort of neighborhoods that, you know, of a new age, where they're trying to put old front porches out again so that neighbors would be connected, and you would be within walking distance of all your stores and shops. It was really beautiful, and it was a great place for families and kids and dogs and the whole nine. It was not a great location to begin growing flowers. First of all, we didn't own the home. We were renting a house at that time.
That's hard.
And the lot was, you know, the size of a postage stamp. So we knew that we were going to have to find another place to grow some things. We had a possible family friend that had a farm. We were originally thinking about doing it there, and then there was a death in the family, and that wasn't going to work. But my mom lived on an acre in, you know, this little ag reserve area of Montgomery County, Maryland, and said, you know, hey, why don't you just come here and you can grow whatever you want in our yard. And when I say the yard was basically an open slate, I mean, it was an open slate with like 20
slate.
Oh, right. Blank slate. Sorry. It was a blank slate with, like, I don't know, 20 years of overgrowth. Right. So I think nobody had paid any attention to, not even really a landscape component to the property. So we came out our first year and just started here, just broke ground on just 2 tiny little plots, and literally threw in cosmos, zinnias, and sunflowers and sweet peas. That's what we started with, and maybe like 10 dahlia tubers, just because that was sort of an homage to Tom's mother, who's been growing dahlias for over 30 years.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we did it, and I mean, you know, those are easy seeds to germinate. I mean, I think the first time we saw seeds actually poke through the soil, I was maybe giddy. Like, oh my gosh, you know, like, wow, this is actually going to work. And so we got started, and it was probably within a very short period of time that we got things into the ground, and we really started seeing success with the growing, that we decided that, wow, wouldn't it be cool to actually try and make a little side hustle income from this cute little hobby that we have.
You just got hooked.
We got hooked. We totally did.
As anybody who's in flowers gets hooked.
We don't have to explain it. Most people who are listening to a podcast like this are going to understand what that feels like. But it definitely was a life-changing experience. And so it just snowballed from there. I mean, once you dive into the growing component and you really love it, then you're sort of thinking, okay, well, then we got to figure out how to make some money. So then you sort of shift gears into thinking about it more business terms.
Is it even possible to make some money?
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I think that, I mean, it's been a slow evolution in a way, but then when you look back and think, wow, what we've been able to accomplish in just 4 years, it's really gone quite fast. And to be honest, you know, Tom and I are sort of hardwired for intensity, and for good and not so good sometimes. And our previous careers, and mine in particular, as in litigation, is just very sort of intense and hardcore. And when you work like a dog. And I think Tom felt some of that too in research. You know, you just don't give up on something. You just dig in and keep going and going and going. So I don't know. It definitely it got very intense pretty quickly.
Passion. We just had passion
Yeah,
for it.
it was just like, wow, can you imagine what our life might look like if we were to actually really be able to shift gears? And for a lot of people, I think this conversation is kind of an interesting one, because I think a lot of people are really want to do that, right? Like we're all sort of
Right.
trained, right? We're all trained that we go off and we get our educations, and we're supposed to be in these careers that are giving us, are lucrative and giving us money. And you occasionally, at least after a period of time, I think once you get through your 30s, you're kind of like, wow, this is sort of not very interesting, or it's just so stressful that I feel like I don't really have a lot of meaning in my work, in my life maybe, but I don't want to have to live most of my life in an office setting doing the thing I don't really want to do, to be able to sneak in time for the things that I actually love. What if we turn that whole concept on its head and we figured out how to make money and live off of the thing we really love? And so once you have sort of that seismic shift in your own mindset about that, you start dreaming about what this could actually look like. And I think we did that really quickly. And that's sort of, we're still doing that. And one of the good, fun things about owning a business and being entrepreneurial, which neither one of us had ever done anything like that before, is the fact that you're just constantly dreaming. I mean, you don't ever stop. There's never, if you get bored as an entrepreneur, you're not really working very hard, because you're constantly trying to reinvent or shift gears or pivot, as they say, or, this worked, but this didn't. Let's figure out why. And it's like a puzzle that you're constantly, putting together, taking apart, tweaking, figuring out. And I find those kinds of challenges really fun.
Well, there's also, I think we have a core ethos, and that is, we have a few core ethos principles, but I think one of them is we want to innovate. We want to try new things. We want to push the boundaries of floral design, floriculture, sustainable growing, so that's, I think, really what has sort of made it, it's been the sort of foundation of our success, but it's also just something that I feel like gives us meaning. And that's sort of why we sort of operate the way we do. A lot of people look at it from the outside and go, God, you guys are you're just going everywhere and doing all these things. And it's like, that's what we enjoy about it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we did, Scott, in the very beginning was that first year, we started growing in February, and in July, we found ourselves sort of serendipitously at Deborah Prinzing's Slow Flower Summit, which was in DC. It just so, it's sort of like you figure out, or you think that these things are just coincidental, right? But but maybe it wasn't coincidental at all. That so soon as we started this journey, we would arrive at this place where now many of those people, I know them. At the time, we didn't know anyone except for Kelly Shore, and we were there, and of course, indoctrinated into all of these really interesting value-based ideas about slow flowers and the environment and how to source things, and also the underbelly of the floral industry is exposed to a certain degree, because if you're talking about those kinds of things, you're not just talking about making a lot of money from a commodity. You're talking about changing an industry for good, for for environmental reasons and for community and for all kinds of things. Well, that hit a chord, like a big chord. And we were like, okay, who knows? Most consumers don't know all of these challenges with the floral industry. They just go to the grocery store and they see flowers for sale, and they don't ask themselves, where do they come from? They don't have any idea about some of these very complex areas of trouble in this industry. And so to get information like that so soon in our journey of trying this business, I think it really helped develop the foundation of the direction we wanted to go, which was, we're going to do this different. We are not just here to make money. We are here to make some changes and to speak to and learn as much as we can about it, and then try to be messengers of change. And yeah.
I feel like so many times, I know I was just reading about podcasts and longevity and how the average podcast doesn't even make it a year and all this sort of stuff. And I think the same thing is really true with flower farmers. How many people fall in love with this idea or this concept, or they love flowers and they're passionate about it, but then the reality of dealing with the weather or seed quality or injuries, or the less glamorous side of it, let's say, all of a sudden sort of pops those bubbles and those people fade out. But I think what I hear, and I think this is what comes through in everything you guys do, is you have deeper incentives in what you do. You're not just trying to just grow the flowers. You're trying, like you said earlier, innovate. You're trying to reinvent the systems that we took in place. And in a way, we've had a few people, let's just say over the last 30 years of floral growing, that have made a sizable contribution that has caused shifts. And honestly, I feel like we are ripe for another one. It is time to level the game up, and especially now as right now as we're recording this, of course, it's the National American Flowers Month, program that's going on and celebrating flower farmers all across the country. And I think that now, with all the influx in just the last 10 years of flower farmers like yourselves, I mean, it's time. It's really time to really start really looking at things much, much differently. What was your takeaway from your studies and research about imports and that side of things?
Before he starts, because this is going to be Tom's area, which is totally fine because I've dominated this conversation thus far. But I want to just say that heading into this, we did not start in 2018 thinking to ourselves, we are going to just go, all out for organic farming. We really didn't. We didn't say, ooh, we can't wait to use Roundup on our field, but we didn't also have a particular affiliation or mindset about organic farming. But that was something that Tom really took on in diving into really reading. I mean, he's, like I said, he's someone who's extremely intense and knows the sciencey stuff, right? Which I don't really get that. It's kind of like math to me. I don't, that language, I don't speak that language very well, but he does. And so he could take something that would be very, dense and academic and about organic farming and understand it in a way that just made sense. And so that was a slow evolution too, except that what I can say now is that we decided, at least that first year, we were not going to spray anything on our plants. We just said, let's just try to not do that. Because Tom had read something that we'll never be able to be certified organic if we start off on this property using those chemicals. It takes so long for them to,
Right.
So he's like, let's just not do it. And, of course, everything got chewed by every bug known to mankind, right? But that has been also a slow evolution in this business as well. Now, of course, it becomes sort of a foundational principle, right? But it didn't necessarily start off, hardcore about that. It's kind of hardcore now. But I also want to say at the outset too, that while we understand, we completely empathize with flower farmers about why it feels impossible to sustain organic methods. It is no joke to grow things organically in terms of bug and pest pressure and disease and everything else. But again, we just are committed to just figuring out if we can do this and even scale up organic growing, because we're growing in a very small space. And it's a lot easier to be experimental with these kinds of practices,
Sure.
right? So anyway, I defer.
Thank you. Well, so definitely, Scott, we should we should get you so you can watch the whole Florvana video from Sean Michael Foley's thing, because I mean, we put some good time into that, made some money to get it professionally done, and I think we really wanted it to be impactful when we presented it. So it's on our website now. You can go there and watch it there. I think it's just on YouTube, since it's on YouTube now, and we can put it in your show notes or whatever, and make sure other people can get access to it, because it's incredibly insightful to learn about what actually is being used on these flowers that are coming from South America and Europe and Africa. They basically, there's no regulations when it comes to what can be used. They don't monitor it when it comes in. There's no US laws about any of that stuff. There's laws about what can be done within the States, but things coming in, they just don't care. They don't monitor. And basically what we found out is that there were, dozens of different sort of insecticides, pesticides, fungicides, preservatives, different things that they had put on these plants to essentially make it so that they would, first of all, be almost completely sterile when they showed up, not a single bug anywhere, but also that they would last at least a little while after they got cut, which in some cases it's been 4 or 5 days since it was cut, and actually gets in the hands of a consumer. So, vase life is already crap, and then they try and just do what they can to extend that artificially if they can. So there were actual scientific peer-reviewed articles that had come out, and they had documented, I think it was in Belgium, where they documented what is it that florists and floral designers are touching on a daily basis. And that's really the main concern is, a lot of people are like, well, I only buy, a bouquet 6 times a year, if that, maybe twice, Mother's Day and Valentine's Day, right? And so what do I care? It's like, I'm not really touching them all that often. Well, florists and floral designers are touching those imported flowers daily. And they actually were able to document that there were, increases in, skin conditions, increases in cancer, birth defects in women that were contacting these things. Basically, all of the worst things you can think of when it comes to chemical toxicity, they were seeing as a result of floral designers and florists touching these chemicals in these flowers. So, I mean, talk about like a slap in the face. I mean, you just sort of are like, wow, this is not sustainable. And then, let's extend beyond that. What's the carbon footprint of importing flowers like this? Massive, huge amount that, just to me doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's like most commoditized things. We're not really thinking about it from a perspective only about how much money we can make off of it, not what the impacts are. And so I think what I'm hoping is we're on the verge of is a bit of a renaissance when it comes to organic growing within the floriculture and the flower world. It's vegetables and vegetables and food, livestock are already moving in that direction, and we're happy to see that. But flowers are probably, I'd say, a good 10, if not 20 years behind.
Really? That long?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, just in terms of like, the incentives, the pressure, the consumers, the general public just doesn't know, like it's amazing how little they know. And so there's a lot of education that needs to happen, which that's something that we focus on a lot of, and getting out and trying to get onto different platforms and talk about it helps a lot. But it's really just about saying like, hey, this is going on. This is the story. Here's what's actually happening. Here's the impact. And here's what we can do about it, more importantly. And that was actually another aspect of the Florvana video that we made a point of emphasizing, which was, okay, we've told you all this horrible stuff. I know it scares you, and we're not trying to scare you, but we want you to have the straight stuff, the honest stuff. And then here's what we can do. Here's some things we can do. And so we just said, okay, start contacting your local flower farms. Find one local flower farm you can work with as a designer and a florist. Wear gloves when you're handling these imported flowers, like at a minimum. Like we're not, we get it. You're going to have to handle some roses in your time as a florist or floral designer, right? Like roses are just one of those things that probably it's going to take years before we can even remotely compete, and maybe never on roses. But on any imported flower, just wear gloves, wash your hands more regularly. A lot of these things are just basic ways in which the florists and floral designers can protect themselves on the existing products they're using. Start using more sustainable floral design mechanics. Get away from the floral foam, for crying out loud. Oh, awful stuff, awful. And I get it. It's just the way it's always been done. And like, some of these, ways that people are trained out there, it's just what they do. But yeah, so we're trying to sort of do both sides of this. And luckily we have a lot of great partners in this. One of our dear sweet friends, Blair Roberts, she's Sweet Blossoms is her.
The Sweet Blossoms.
Yeah, she's illuminated a lot of this for us very early on. She had some blog posts basically showing the amount of plastic waste that is generated from doing it just a small wedding, not even a big wedding, and
The
it was
cardboard, the plastic, that everything's wrapped, that just
Yeah.
the mounds of waste that just go straight into the garbage.
right. And so she's telling this from a designer's perspective, and then so we're coming at it from the growing perspective. So anyway, I've kind of gotten off here. This is the broader picture, but then to get into the actual growing methods, that's a whole nother thing where, okay, we're only going to use OMRI listed materials. So OMRI is the governing body for what is considered an organic product, pesticide, whatever it is. It's a product, a chemical product, typically, both for fertilizers and for pest management, disease management, all that. So basically, Organic Materials Review Institute, OMRI. So these are the guys that will tell you, hey, it's on the bottles, OMRI approved. So that's how you can stay consistently within what would be considered certified organic. We're not certified, and certification is a bit of a mixed bag, right? Like it costs a ton of money, it takes a long time, and people are sort of like, is it really worth it? Are you, in the time and energy and money that it takes to get the certification, are you gaining something as a business by having it? I think the answer is yes, but not nearly to the level that food does, right?
Right.
And until that's sort of a bit of a catch-22, right? Like it's like, okay, until the public is more accepting of it, we really shouldn't pursue it. But if we don't pursue it, then how will the public ever be more accepting of it?
But I think it does come from consumer demand, right?
It does,
So
yeah.
because once you started educating the consumer on food, they started, the demand, then businesses follow suit. I mean, customers come into your grocery store and say, where are your organic offerings? And grocery stores probably 25 years ago were like, what are you talking about? Now you can't go into a Giant or Safeway or any without an organic section, at least giving consumers the choice. So that's the component, the key component of this, right? If you can get into consumers' minds and hearts, value-based kinds of information. So there are a lot of people who won't care. They're only going to be looking at cost, and they're like, I don't touch them that much, or there might even be designers who are like, I don't really care. It's easier to use floral foam, and I'm never going to change it. That's an option, but there is also another way, and another pathway that just should be more easily accessible to people who are in the floral industry and people who are purchasing flowers that are more conscientious about the choices that they're making in their purchasing power. And so it's empowering. I mean, one of the cool things for this particular season is that we have now started working in farmers markets, which we've never done before. Our primary customers are normally floral designers, and that's where a lot of our focus has been. We feel very connected to that community, and we want for them to be safe. So for us to publish that art, or to use that article and try to educate, was really about like, hey friends, we want you to not be exposing yourself to risks like this. That came from a very genuine concern about them. But it's been also really cool to get access to consumers in a new way at these farmers markets, because of course many of them have no clue about flowers. They don't, but many want to know. I mean, they're curious about organic. They see on our signage, organic boutique flower farm. Like, what does that mean when you see organic? And you engage them in that, and then they walk away with more information. And the whole point of consumer education is just to get people informed. If the information changes minds, great. If it doesn't, so be it. It may not.
Well, it's a slow progression, right? Like this is not something that changes overnight. It just takes repetition, constantly talking about it, getting it out there amongst many different voices, many different platforms. So it's going to happen. But yeah, so it's, you know, one of the things that, you know, we're trying to stay within the realm of what would be certified organic. So it's the chemicals that we're using. And then it's also our methods. So some of this is sort of goes hand in hand with sustainability too. So I know we're going to talk about that too. But basically organic and sustainable are pretty much sort of interchangeable in terms of, you know, some stuff you do that's sustainable is not necessarily termed organic, but it all is really going towards the same ideal, which is let's just be better to the environment.
Right.
And so, you know, really from pretty much every aspect of our growing, we try and look at like, what is the most sustainable thing we can do? You know, how do we save more water? How do we avoid soil erosion? How do we, you know, not add artificial fertilizers into our soil? How do we maintain good soil health, a good soil ecosystem? You know, it's just pretty much anything and everything. And then it comes down to like, you know, hey, maybe there's full on new growing methods that don't even involve soil that we could use to grow. So that's another segue into something important.
Hint, hint. Yeah. Aquaponics.
Yeah. So I won't broach that yet.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah. I do want to get to that, but I wanted to.
Subtle. We're very subtle, Scott.
Yeah. Well, you know, sometimes you need waving flags for me, so it's okay. So, you touched on something, and I think a lot of times when I hear about people who are trying to grow naturally, they don't think about fertilizers as much as they do pesticides and fungicides. And I'm wondering, could you maybe help people understand why even that level of natural fertilizer, and why is that so important?
Yeah, so it definitely is there's a bias there of like, hey, I'm just in things that I'm spraying to try and control pests, trying to control disease is really the main concern of organic. But fertilizer, so the one thing you always have to keep in mind is anything that you're going to add into your farm, and this is seeds or tubers or corms or bulbs or you know, fertilizer, pretty much anything. However that thing was made or created or grown, that has to be organic as well. And this is when you can get a little bit down the rabbit hole, because you're like, okay, how far back do we trace the origins of something to make sure that it was, you know, produced in the most organic way possible. So you have to. I'm not trying to suggest that like you go crazy and
yeah, we're not complete purists.
Yeah, I mean, get totally granular. It would be nearly impossible, because I feel like there are some things that just you won't be able to source, and it just would be a nightmare. But the fertilizer is important, because ultimately what we're really trying to do is to avoid, and this is a big factor here in Maryland with you know, runoff into the Chesapeake, but runoff into any waterway is a very high concern amongst anybody who's doing conservation or you know, anybody who's in the government who's trying to regulate these things. Because one of the big challenges is especially phosphorus. When phosphorus runs off and there's excess, it goes into the waterways and it creates algal blooms and it starves the water of oxygen and basically causes a whole ripple effect down multiple ecosystems. And so really what we're trying to do is we're trying to do more natural ways in which we can add the appropriate nutrients into the soil, unlock sort of the natural sort of processes that are already existing, you know, the soil food web, as they call it, which is basically just this entire ecosystem of a lot of different participants, microbes and microarthropods and you know, nematodes and worms to even larger animals. But they all sort of interact to create this healthy ecosystem. Well, if we just harness that, we just activate that, a lot of the nutrients that we need are already sort of there. It's when we try and go in and we try and sledgehammer, away at different aspects of the soil character, the soil nutrient profile, that we get a lot of these downstream effects that we don't want. So I think what we really just need to be,
in other words, Mother Nature sort of already had it figured out, and humans have just interfered.
As we normally do.
As we do.
We bang down the door and we're like, oh, we're going to do it our way, and we're going to do it
it needs to be faster.
It's got to be
quicker,
faster, more efficient.
Bigger.
We got to produce more and bigger and better. And it's like, well, okay, pump your brakes. We can get there, but let's not do it. Let's not do it completely blind to the consequences of our actions, which, again, a very typical human trait.
I think a lot of times we didn't know the consequences of our actions, but it's sort of like we have enough information now. Science has provided enough information for us to know that there are negative consequences to some of these decisions. And so you either have to just completely and blindly not care or disregard it. So you're either disregarding the information is not true, which some people may do, or you're just not making decisions any differently in spite of it. Right. And, we just don't want to do either of those things. It's like when you know more, hopefully you're armed with the information to make better decisions. And that's just, we think most people are hardwired for that. Most people want to do the right thing. Most farmers want to do the right thing, and many are. Let's just have that conversation more regularly in the floral community, so that we can support each other and help each other do better.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I think we're trying to do when it comes to working with other farmers, so this, there's one aspect of trying to teach the general public, of trying to teach florists and floral designers, but when it comes to other farmers, what we're really trying to do is to say, here's some ways in which you can be more organic. Here's some ways in which you can be more sustainable. Here's the methods. There's a lot, and unfortunately, some of the things they're harder. They take more time and labor. Some things are a little bit pricier. Something that is an organic control might cost a little bit more, but or sometimes it's just a patience thing. Like, it's not going to turn around like that. It's going to turn around over a season or 2 seasons or 3 seasons. A lot of soil management is exactly like that. So I think for us, it's like what we're really trying to do. Again, it's a lot of education. We're just educating all the time, but
including ourselves.
But what's really great, and I think that's one thing I feel like I do pretty well at. I feel like I'm a pretty good teacher. I've been told I can teach fairly well. I hope that's
you true. Are, honey.
Okay, all right, good. I don't want to toot my own horn or anything, but I do feel
I'm
like
always learning from you guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And people tell us that. They're always like, oh, you guys give us such great insight and info on things. So I think that's really the big thing. It's like we're learning how to do a lot of this organic sustainable stuff. We try it, we have mixed results, or we have great results, or whatever, and then we share it with everybody, and hopefully we start to disseminate and change sort of the attitudes around these approaches. But yeah, there's some standard stuff: no-till, using worm tea, compost tea for fertilization, fertigating, irrigation control, smart irrigation controllers that manage, that we have one that's Wi-Fi enabled. It basically goes out and it communicates with satellites to know exactly when it's going to rain, so it shuts it off and saves water. It's a lot of things like that, a lot of smart approaches in terms of, when I say smart, just connected to the internet and basically downloading information all the time to try and help manage the decisions that we have to make on the farm all the time. It's like a lot of those kinds of things. They're just, if you're really curious, there's the technology out there has just exploded, and there's a lot of really interesting ways in which we can do better as growers.
And it's really interesting because I'm not oriented around a lot of the science about soil, right? So when we first started, we heard from so many farmers, especially being members of the ASCFG. Many of the experienced farmers would say this mantra over and over: know your soil. Your soil health is crucial. You're not going to be able to grow healthy, great flowers unless you get a soil test. That should be the first thing you're doing, investing in your soil health. Well, you listen to that as a new grower. And this, for me, someone who's like, okay, well, so I got the soil test. Now, what the hell does any of this mean? Right? Like reading it, you have to have some sort of, you need to ask the right questions and try to understand it. And I had in my back pocket a scientist. And many people don't have that. Tom was able to look at it and go, oh, well, this is simple. We just need to blah, blah, blah. And for me, I was like, this is all gobbledygook. I don't understand any of what this means. I want someone to just tell me what to go buy and then how much to put on exactly, so it's intimidating. It's intimidating I think I'm a reasonably bright person, but I am not oriented around stuff like that, except for the idea is that it is the most critical component of flower farming. It literally is like, it starts from the ground up. And if you're focused there, our blooms have changed. We've had some soil issues, ironically, this year that have been challenging, but each year that we improve the soil, our flowers get better. They're more long lasting. They're more pest resistant. It just has, I've seen it, the evolution. We have heavy red clay here, and it's just horrible. It's horrible. It's like, I can't believe anything grows in it, quite honestly, because there's no drainage. It's awful. But we don't have that now. We're basically, in 4 years, we're completely loam on our space that, where we're living. We'd have a brand new leased field, however, that is not looking so hot on the soil test. It's going to take several seasons to be able to get that in better condition. Have some of the flowers struggled over there? Yeah, they have. You can see the difference. So, I still to this day don't really understand a lot of that stuff. So I just completely defer to Tom on it. But we felt like, as Tom was beginning to dig in and really learn about soil health and fungus and mycorrhizal fungi and all these things that he was so interested in, we would post stuff on Instagram, and we're shocked that people even cared, right? That, but people are hungry for that kind of information from someone who can help them synthesize what it means.
Well,
right?
I want to say this because I feel like there's a couple things here. One is, there's such a void of that kind of information that when one person says something, it's kind of like, whoa, wow. It's like you feel those ripples far out into the pond, because it's just not a conversation that's being had.
Right.
And I feel like, there's a lot of, having been in the floral industry for so long and knowing that most floral designers aren't the best business people. And it's only because they tend to be creative. They tend to not want to get into the numbers. They tend to not want to get into the technology. They tend to not, that's not the fun stuff to them. And I get it. But just like those not fun things are so crucial to running a business, to me, soil is exactly the same not fun thing for being a farmer. But I know it was interesting. I was shocked, and I've shared this story differently, I think, in the past, but my family farm is now in the hands of my uncle, and he's by no means organic, but in producing corn and soybeans, and anyway, I can go on and on about that. But I was shocked at the fact that he was I was shocked. I was up there a few years ago, maybe, gosh, how long has that been now? That may have been like 6 or 7, 8 years ago. And he is practicing no-till farming. And I was like, what? You are doing what? And the interesting thing was, I said, well, I'm just curious, because he's been doing it now. He had been doing it for years. And he had been doing it in sections, like this part of the farm. I forget, he farms over 100 acres. And so like these sections, he had gradually, as he became sold on this concept, I do mean sold, he's sold out on it now, that he is farming 100+ acres, all no-till.
Wow.
Because he said, you know, when I first started doing it, and he had the huge equipment to do some of this, because basically, you know, they don't break up the soil, but they do sort of need that plant material into the soil, just that
Right.
very initial layer. And
Yep.
you guys probably know more about this than I do, but I will say, he said it took 3 years. He's like, 3 years. And this is the crazy thing to me, is in 3 years, his production was up, depending on the crop, anywhere from 30 to 50%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you think, you know, in our minds, we feel like the only way to achieve that is through chemicals and fertilizers and tillage and things like that. But getting back to these, you know, natural environmental processes that's been going on for a very long time. And you get back to that and you think, what do you learn? You learn that, wow, it impacts everything.
There's two really powerful films. If people are interested in this kind of thing, I think that were really fundamentally helpful to Tom and I too. One is called Kiss the Ground. Woody Harrelson narrates it, and it's all about soil erosion.
Netflix. It's on Netflix.
It's amazing. It's like groundbreaking and so interesting.
That story you told is literally told the same. It's the same story in that movie.
It's so good. So farmers, if you are interested in this kind of thing, that movie is a must see. Kiss the Ground. The other is The Biggest Little Farm, which has been out for quite a while and is also just a sweet, wonderful documentary story, but also goes into concepts regarding permaculture and how to change and transform a property from one that was a monoculture, overcropped, over fertilized, the soil was dead, and how to turn it around. And that it took 7 years, at least during the making of that film, over 7 years to really start to see the changes, right? So it's not a quick fix to be able to do this. And I think that the impatience of human beings and the need to produce more and more and more, people just figure, we'll just take the top-down approach and we're going to get, you know, you may get better yield initially, but over the course and life of a farm, you're going to actually erode the soil. You're going to produce less. You're going to have more pest pressure. And the whole concept of these movies, which is so powerful, is teaching people that actually our approach is from the ground up. And that there's so much power in figuring out how to assist the environment to give you better results, as opposed to fighting it.
Yeah, the general theme of sustainability is you can't take out of the farm and then not put back, right? And so like every time you cut something off of the farm, every stem we cut and we go and sell to somebody, that is carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur, calcium, you know, all of the nutrients that are going to creating that bloom, that goes off the farm. So you got to put that back, right? Like you can't just take, and then never put back. That is essentially what we've been doing. And so then it's like, it just means you have to put more and more back in. Well, if you manage it correctly, you can get it in a balance, in a harmonious balance, and you don't have to keep continually add back. Yeah, you might have to occasionally add in some you know, compost and compost tea and things like this. But generally speaking, if you can get that balance right, and this is part of the no-till, you can actually it can maintain itself, and you can pull out what you need, but you're not ever really depleting of anything. And I got to tell you, that's a good feeling as a farmer, when you feel like I am a partner to nature. I am not taking. I'm not an abusive, you know, neglectful partner. You know, like I am actually trying to support my partner. And it's a good metaphor for our own relationship in farming. You know, it's like we have to support each other. So yeah, it's really, I mean,
it does. Symbiosis has a special meaning in that context, right? So we definitely feel when we're out there, it's like if my conscience, I feel settled and calm in my consciousness about the way that we're treating our land, and consequently it then transfers into how I feel about the flowers that we grow.
Right.
You know, maybe some people might think it's a little weird, and maybe it is a little weird, but I really feel an affiliation and genuine like affection toward these plants, which are living, breathing things.
Well, we're proud.
And we're proud of them, of what we produce, and we're taking their life like you would take an animal's life to eat it, right? We're every time you cut a flower off a plant, you're killing it. And if I'm going to do that, right, and I'm going to end the life of this living thing, I should at least honor its life in the best possible way before I do that.
We have some different attitudes about this.
I know, but it just sounds so woo-woo. But I mean, I do feel that way.
A little woo-woo is not bad.
Right. I mean, I'm woo-woo slightly, but you know, it kind of goes against my lawyer brain. But you know, I'm trying to lean into woo-woo.
That's funny. Okay.
Yeah, but that's a genuine feeling, I think, of sort of for me, you know, sort of a spiritual connection with being responsible toward the planet and feeling like I'm producing something that it's all connected. You know, and I don't exactly know how to word that in a way that makes sense, but it just feels that way. A lot of people feel that way about farming, about flowers, about connection with plants. It's something I never thought that I would necessarily, it would be a pathway to spiritual kind of journey, but it is for me. Not for everybody, but that's okay. So yeah.
But I think too, I think you put into words what a lot of people probably feel and just haven't taken the time to put into words. And I think and I appreciate that about you and being willing to do that, because I feel like there is a connection that people have, and not everyone takes the time to really think about why. And I thought that was really well said.
Well, well, let's put it this way. If you're in flower farming and floral design, or the floral industry at all, I think this is probably universally true. It is hard work. It is hard. I mean, for us in farming, it's today it's 95 degrees and humid and disgusting, and it's buggy. And some of our dahlias are like, they hate the heat, so they're just like, you know, looking like out there, you know, just sad and angry about how hot it is. And I don't know, it just, if you there's got to be some, for the people who can stay in it sustainably, right? Not from an environmental standpoint, but they can sustain the difficulty over time. If you really were, I think, dig in and ask, why would you continue to do this if it's so hard, it's so physically demanding, and there's so many roadblocks? While there's usually a very deep, you know, connection with plants or flowers or something, you know. But yeah, I agree with you that we don't often hear that part like on a regular basis. But I would argue that if for those who are in it for the long haul, that if that doesn't exist, I don't know how they're doing it. Because if it's just about money, I mean, you know, that nobody's getting rich in this industry, first of all, not many people. And if it's just about money, it sort of loses its luster over time to a certain degree, because money's kind of hollow in a way. Anyway, I'm on a rant.
Well, I have two things that I definitely, first of all, I know that recently you were awarded an incredible honor. I know there's some backstory here, so tell us about this incredible thing you were awarded.
Yeah, well,
go Tom.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is definitely something that I've been working on for a long time. So one of the things we didn't quite get into, but we almost scratched the surface of, was a new growing method for us that is honestly the greenest way to grow. It's one of the most sustainable ways to grow, and that's aquaponics. So I think some people have heard of hydroponics. Mm-hmm. Aquaponics is sort of a cousin of that method. Both are growing plants in water, essentially. And the only difference between these two methods is how you're adding in the nutrients and the fertilizer and the things that you need that the plants need besides the water and the carbon dioxide. So aquaponics is a natural closed loop system. Essentially what it is you've got fish in an aquarium or in a tank. They're producing their waste, their pee, their poop, their nitrogen. The fish are excreting nitrogen. Bacteria are converting that into a form that plants can use. Plants are absorbing the nitrogen, and then water is returned to the fish clean. And it's just this cycle that then goes on in perpetuity. And it's happening naturally in all the ponds and lakes out there, the freshwater areas. And so basically you're mimicking this natural process. And that's why ultimately it's the greenest way to grow, because it is there's very few inputs, right? Essentially, if you get the system nice and finely tuned, all you have to do is add fish food, feed the fish, and that's pretty much it. And so that's ultimately why it is the most organic method. And the sustainability aspect is it uses 95% less water than soil-based growing. Sometimes you can get a growth rate increase of almost twofold, so stuff can grow twice as fast.
Wow.
Why is that?
So basically that has to do with just the sort of readily accessible nutrients, right? Like essentially the plants don't have to do, there's never a time when it's like, oh, you might not get enough nitrogen, you might not get enough phosphorus, you might not get enough of a micronutrient. It's just constantly available to them. And so there's no limitations on how fast they can grow. There's a whole scientific principle behind that, but I won't get into it because it's not necessary.
Basically, the plants don't ever have to hit the brakes. So.
They don't ever have to hit the brakes. That's actually that's a great explanation, Scott. They don't have to hit the brakes. There's no rate limiting step.
Than's for dumbing it down for all the rest
of
it.
It's called job security. Anyway.
Yeah,
well done,
yeah. I understand that language.
I condensed it nicely. So it's a method that is being employed by vegetable growers very readily, right? All around the US, all around the world. People are using this method to grow leafy greens and other vegetables. It works amazingly well. Nobody is really using it for flowers. And so I found this, absence of research and absence of data. And I was like, well, clearly it could work for flowers. It should work for flowers. And if it did, and whoever might do that might have an advantage over other flower growers. So I started pursuing it. I started looking into it, and I gradually started creating my own system, a small little DIY system in our small little DIY greenhouse.
Our first year, by the way.
First
growing.
year, and it was like, Sarah was sort of like, okay.
I was rolling my eyes and saying,
it seems like a lot of time and money.
This seems like, how much are you spending on that? That stupid barrel thing, and then oh yeah. God, I didn't get it at all, and I still don't really get it per se, but I trust Tom.
She's going along with
I trust Tom implicitly,
yes.
and I think that I
appreciate that.
He's actually been able to prove me somewhat wrong.
I wasn't trying to prove her wrong. I was trying to prove other people wrong.
You were trying to prove yourself right. That's what
I was trying to. There you go. That's a more positive way.
Yes.
I was trying to prove myself right, which is a fun endeavor to take on sometimes, right? They say, yeah, I'm gonna prove that you can do this and it'll work. And so basically we started showing that you could produce blooms from a lot of different types of flowers, the basic stuff, zinnias, celosia, and gomphrena, and ageratum, and the things that are pretty easy to grow anyway. But then I started doing stuff like jewels of opar and dahlias we got to bloom, and a lot of stuff that is pretty unique and rare. Ranunculus I got to bloom in the system. So things that are pretty valuable in terms of the price per stem and how much revenue you can make off of these things. So it was very encouraging. So fast forward a bit, I started to apply for grants. I actually started applying quite a while ago and was seeing a lot of rejection, which is not uncommon, with grants. There's a lot of no's before you get to a yes, or at least before somebody gives you at least a little bit of money. But of course, that just motivates you more to say, okay.
Not everybody.
No.
Motivate everybody more.
Well.
So here's the thing. Like, credit. Yeah, okay. Tom and I can't ever figure out if we're like motivated by spite or just motivated by, like, you know what I mean? Like somebody tells us no, and we're like, really? Really? Watch us. It's kind of like maybe not the emotionally best place to feel motivation, but I figure whatever gets you to the finish line is probably okay. And in this case, Tom was motivated by the knowledge, and I was like, go get him. go get them, go get.
But when
go.
you see the big picture and you see the major shift that something like that can have, it's like I mean, you think about the first person to think that the world wasn't right, flat,
Right,
you just
right.
at some point you believe it, and that's what drives you. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really take it so much personally as I did just the technology and the science is sound. Like when you know that the data and the science and the technology is there, when someone tells you that it's not going to work, you're just like, oh, come on, you're just not seeing it yet.
Right.
So let's open your eyes a bit. So started applying for stuff. Got, it was about 2 years of mostly rejections. I didn't really get any traction, so I'm still sort of spending my own money on this. Finally, I got the USDA has a subdivision, a wing of their agency called SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. And so this SARE program is like designed just for these kinds of projects, things that are experimental but would help advance the sustainable agriculture ethos. So it was like, not a huge grant, but it was enough to kind of finally pay me a little bit of money to do the research and also to be able to expand my system a little bit. And it was a great confidence boost. So I got that earlier this year.
Mhm.
Yeah, earlier this year, 2021. And I was like, okay, great. And that's a big help, but we need more. We need more money. Because unfortunately, one of the big hurdles of implementing these systems is the cost. There is a significant upfront cost, especially if you want to scale it to a commercial level. So that is one thing we're going to have to work on in the future, is how can we make this a little bit more accessible for more everyday farmers. But I submitted another application to the Maryland TEDCO. So TEDCO is the Tech Economic Development Council for Maryland. And it's a separate agency that's state funded and sort of associated with the state. And what they do is they just try and incubate and accelerate tech companies and give them funding and support and all the things they need. So they had a bunch of COVID money left over from the Relief Act, the Maryland Relief Act, and they wanted to inject it back into the economy. So they put out a call for applications specifically for rural and agricultural businesses. And they said, do you present us with an idea or a technology that will allow your business to pivot in this sort of new environment of COVID, post-COVID. And that could really be a lot of different things. But anyway, I had all of the documentation pretty much already ready to go. Like I'd already written this grant for Sarah,
Right.
basically just kind of copy and pasted, which is a nice thing to have. It's like once you've got the narrative, you've got the theme, you can kind of just start.
And the data.
And the data, there's some data there too. And then so you start applying for other things that way. So, and then it just expand the budget. So the budget was $200,000 for 1 year, unrestricted. Now that is a big thing, right? Because a lot of these grants, Scott, you can't see him, but Scott's making a shocked face. Yeah,
I'm excited for you.
It is. It's a huge amount of money. So, but unrestricted is a good point, because a lot of these grants will tell you that we'll give you this money, but you can't spend it on infrastructure. You can't spend it on equipment. You can't build any buildings. It's only really for like materials and maybe like paying people, like salaries. So that's kind of a problem, right? Because especially if I need to build a greenhouse and I need to build a system, I can't do that. So this was a really huge possibility here. Well, long story short, we all know already the punchline, which is we won the grant. And just a huge thing. So the money is, we're going to get 50% of it up front, and we're basically going to be able to build the greenhouse. We're still trying to figure out where we're going to build it. That's a bit of a challenge right now, but we're working on it. And then we build the system, and the hope is that, so part of what I wrote into this was not just dahlias. Dahlias is a big thing. I want to be able to grow year-round dahlias in these systems. That would be huge in and of itself. But I also
big eyes, yes,
big eyes again from Scott. But I also pitched that we could try to grow Disenchanted as well, which is obviously another big crop that a lot of people love, and you can get a good hot price per stem, and the base life is amazing. So yeah, it's basically like the plan eventually is to grow a lot of different things via this method year round in these systems, the most sustainable green way you can. So yeah, just totally took us by surprise. I had no idea we were going to get this money. and it's kind of just totally accelerated us into this whole new area. You know, like it was all kind of in the abstract before, like, oh yeah, someday we'll have an aquaponics system on a commercial scale, someday we'll have a greenhouse. That is happening like in, you know,
Now.
3 to 6 months.
Now.
You know,
Now.
it's happening now. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we're just trying to sort of wrap our brains around now this whole different approach and this whole different direction our business is taking. You know, we're still going to grow in soil. We're still going to, I mean, a lot of perennials, you know, still all the peonies and hydrangeas and all of these other things that we can do perennials.
Well, the reality is too that, you know, I mean, some of what we're going to be continuing to do with this is a lot of it is still experimental, right? So Tom is growing dahlias in aquaponics right now in our tiny little DIY greenhouse, and they're thriving. So, and those are from tuber, you know, so he's figured out a method they're not submerged in water, but they're in something called autopots. So they are rooting up and growing. And we know now that we can get dahlia blooms in these systems, which many naysayers told us in the beginning that you'll never get any flowers to bloom because it's too nitrogen heavy and you're never going to get the micronutrients necessary to do that. And Tom was like, no, I don't think that's correct. I think I can. So it's just, I mean, I have to say at the outset that I'm just, I don't want to say I was the biggest naysayer. I was probably one of the first naysayers.
Let's say you're the first convert. How about that?
I'm the first convert. Because I really, I believe in my husband, and I know how smart he is, and I know how much tenacity that he has. And, you know, that's a wicked combination for innovation, in my opinion. So I just encourage, as we were moving forward and we were hearing, you know, rejections, some of which, you know, one of the rejections he got, he was like, I'm absolutely not going to sit down and not confront this. This response to my proposal is not adequate. I don't even know how to modify it. I don't even know how to resubmit it because they've been so unclear about what it is that I did not include that should have been there. So he just took that on, and totally professionally, you know, not attacking anyone, but just like, I need some more data from you about what you need that you don't have in this proposal that is going to convince you that this is worth funding. And, you know, as it turns out, when you push back a little bit, all of a sudden you get this kind of like, well, there really wasn't really good reasons. You know, and some of that has been really illuminating because, you know, what you had in many cases were just sort of people just not really thinking it's a good idea, or people not thinking that it was too innovative or something, like too risky, too whatever, right? And so I don't want to overblow it, but I got to tell you from my perspective, looking from sort of as an outsider, right? I'm not as enmeshed in this as Tom is in terms of the science and all of the experimentation, but looking at it from, you know, like zooming out and looking in at how he struggled with it, but also the feedback he's gotten. He's an innovator. Like, he's doing something that's pushing up against a very old idea about farming.
Right.
And it's asking for people to think outside of this box, which has been an intact little box for a long time. And I think it really is maybe intimidating, slightly scary. Some people feel like it's out of reach because it may not financially be feasible to grow with this methodology that he's suggesting. But I'm like, if nobody's willing to try this,
nobody's tried.
Why, like, what is the impediment to just trying? Like, if you don't have anyone who's willing to push those envelopes, innovation never occurs, right? We're on this precipice of needing to make some changes in this industry, both with growing, with how we source, with, you know, methods used to, you know, farm.
We're beyond needing to. We've needed to for a long time.
Like, we're here.
And
like, let's figure out how to make this work.
There has not been enough people to say, here's how we can change this, and here's what we need to do, and let's do it. Let's put some money behind it, and let's do it. And so I think that's been my strongest motivator. It's just sort of saying, like, we can all see the climate issues, the climate crisis we're in. We know something needs to be done about that. we can all see that the current way that we conduct agriculture is not sustainable. We need to change that. The way that people are doing floral design is not sustainable. We need to change that. I get it. I mean, it's an intimidating thing to be able to say, like, okay, let's just change everything that we've done, or not everything, but a lot of things, a lot of big things that are associated with the way that we've operated as an industry. Let's take some steps. Like, we don't need to do huge, big leaps. Let's just take a few steps here or there. This is one step. So we're excited.
I'm really proud of him. I mean,
I can't tell at all.
No, I know. He's worked so hard, and I think that the other thing too is that, we have wide eyes about this, but we're also realists. I mean, that, we come to this with, like, there are going to be probably fits and starts. This is not going to be smooth sailing all the way. There are going to be probably some things that don't grow as well in the system. I mean, we're gonna like anything in farming, right? My God, if you stop the first time there was a challenge to a crop that you're trying to grow, you'd never do anything. And this is going to be similar in that we're going to struggle perhaps, but that's okay.
We're resilient.
That's okay.
Good deal.
Well, it's not. I mean, it's just working out the kinks at that point. I mean, that's really what it is. You already know what you do works. It's just scaling it, and that's going to have its own challenges, its own struggles, and it's gonna be a bumpy road because it's never been traveled. And so those first people who travel the road always get the bumpy road. Right. But that's through that innovation that we make really huge strides. Okay, so I'm really excited. Thank you so much for sharing about that. I have goosebumps. People who have listened to the podcast a while know that, especially when it comes to things like that, my major before I was in horticulture was marine biology. So I'm totally a fan of this whole system, and I'd love to go deep with this over a beverage, but we can't do that today, unfortunately.
Someday soon, Scott.
Someday soon, yeah. You two are definitely two of those people.
Aww.
And if you don't follow them on Instagram, stop what you're doing as soon as you're done listening and go follow them, because from flower inspiration to moral support to innovation, they cover it all. And thank you guys for being on the Flower Podcast.
I'm so excited we're here. Thank you so much for having us.
Our pleasure.